The 60s was an era of turmoil for the United States. President John F. Kennedy's inauguration and assassination, the war on poverty, and the civil rights movement were only a few of the topics that stirred the nation's political ideals and involvement. The topic of black empowerment was not absent in Indiana, affecting the girls at Cathedral's predecessor, Ladywood School. April 4th, 1968. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the most visible leftist in America and the leader of the civil rights movement, was assassinated. Fellow leftist Robert F. Kennedy was scheduled to give a speech in Indianapolis the same evening. Despite advisory against speaking due to the fear of riots, Kennedy decided to deliver his speech.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer.
As Cathedral's enrollment boomed, other Catholic high schools were built around the area, including Cecina Memorial, Bishop Chatard, and Cardinal Ritter. Political anxieties and hectic changes may have contributed to the decline in enrollment at Cathedral during the 60s. The school became independent and no longer received financial support from the church beginning in 1964.
What years did you go to Ladywood High School?
I went here in 1970 to 74.
All right. What is the most memorable part of your experience in high school?
Just kind of how everybody was just kind of a close-knit. It was a small, it was much smaller than Cathedral, but it was nice.
How was your experience different from your childhood? What were you involved in during high school?
Let's see, I did track. I played the guitar for guitar masses. I played basketball.
Oh, nice. How did the civil rights movement of the early 60s affect you?
Well, I was on April 4th, 1968. I was down at 17th and Broadway. We were waiting, my dad, my brother, and my aunt, who was a nun who taught at St. Agnes High School. We were down there waiting for the rally for Robert Kennedy to arrive. And my aunt taught at St. Agnes, and I think they locked the doors at 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening at night. So we had to leave before Robert Kennedy got there. And when we were driving to take her back, we heard on the radio that Martin Luther King had been assassinated and that he had died. So we dropped her off, and we went back to the rally. And as we were getting out of our car, this guy came up to us and said, if I were you, I would get out of here. But we chose to stay. And so we waited. Robert Kennedy was running late because we knew he had to rewrite his speech that he had planned on giving. And so when he got there, most of the people in the crowd did not know that Martin Luther King had died. And so when Robert Kennedy got up there to speak, that was the first time that a lot of people had already heard. But because we had taken her home, we had heard it on the radio ahead of time. And the crowd was loud. You heard screams. And then Kennedy started his speech. And, he talked all about, how they could revolt, be really mad. Martin Luther King was killed by a white guy. And he also brought into the fact that his brother had been killed also by a white man, and that if Martin Luther King were alive, he wanted everybody to get along. And so by his speech, at the end of his speech, it was just really quiet at the very end. And I remember that really well that night.
So after the speech, like when you were leaving, how would you describe the atmosphere of the rally? And then
it was quiet. It was just really quiet.
Did you feel scared?
No, I was scared at first when that guy told us that we better get out of here. But we chose just to stay. didn't go way into the crowd. We kind of stayed close by to the car. But, I mean, that part was scary.
How would you describe like the atmosphere of the city in like the following hours, days after the rally?
I'm not really sure because I was like 12. I mean, I just remember going back to school and talking about it. And then the coincidence is that 2 months later to the date was when Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles at the Ambassador Hotel after the California primary. It was on June 4th, so 2 months later to the day that happened.
So how did the civil rights affect other students at Ladywood? Like how did it affect Ladywood as a high school?
Okay, see, I wasn't in high school at that time. I was still in grade school.
Okay, so how did it affect your grade school?
I think we talked about it a little. I remember we were out of school the day of I think we were on spring break. I remember watching all of Martin Luther King's funeral, but I don't remember we talked much about it.
Much about it?
Right.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Okay, all right.
Robert Kennedy's goals that night were to console a grieving, outraged city. Confusion and hatred filled the hearts of many people who heard about Dr. King's death. Kennedy's approach to these feelings was to give the troubled people solace and hope. His call for compassion and justice sent out an inspiring message. Though short in length, Kennedy's speech was broad in wisdom. Quote, "So I shall ask you tonight to return home, to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King, that's true, but more importantly to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love, a prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke." End quote.